in Ekaterina Schulmann. She is a political scientist specializing in the legislative process in modern Russia. Pleasure to have you on the show. Walk us through this dynamic that Mark just laid out here. The idea that he claims this wasn't a coup attempt against Vladimir Putin himself, but rather against the defense minister. Shed a little light on the dynamic between Prigozhin and the defense minister Shoigu.
It did look more like a business deal operated through military means than any political move, frankly. The popular description of Russia as a gas station posing as a country is, of course, unfair, but that we do have a chain of shady business operations masquerading as political leadership may be closer to the truth. It is true that Prigozhin's rhetoric was mostly aimed against defense minister and the head of general headquarters, Gerasimov. But recently, some of the things he said seemed to point directly to the president, and his public description of this March for Justice, which was the name he gave to his personal private offensive, was that we should stop living under corruption, dysfunctionality, etc. And this was a description of political system in general rather than at something dysfunctional at the defense ministry. So he was trying to create some sort of public political position for himself. He even before that attempted coup, or a mutiny to be more exact, he made a tour across Russian regions, meeting people, making speeches, and looking all in all like a potential presidential campaign. But that, again, was based on his dissatisfaction with the way he was treated. If we listen to what he says, he said, we had a lucrative business in Africa, we, Wagner, the private military company, but then motherland was in danger, they asked us to help, we helped, but they're not treating us fairly, and now they want to dismantle Wagner. So either pay us or let us go back to Africa to make money. Again, it was all very much in the open. So there was the business part and there was a political part. Judging by the events of this weekend, the business part kind of won over the political.
I love that you talked about it as a kind of through the business lens, of course, given that we're a financial network. Talk to us about Prigozhin's future here specifically. You talked about the potential unwinding of the Wagner network. For Prigozhin, is it really likely that he remains kind of this millionaire in Minsk? What does his future look like?
I don't think we should concern ourselves with his personal future. What I would be looking at is the fate of the institution, Wagner, the private military company, which is, by the way, not the only private military company in Russia, but by far the most public one. So what was happening during these last weeks can be generally described as an attempt on the part of Ministry of Defense to get back all the armed forces under its wing. So the regulars were trying to get rid of the irregulars by either absorbing them or dealing with them otherwise. You should remember how the Deputy Minister of Defense declared that by July the 1st, all the so-called volunteers, which are actually mercenaries, should sign contracts with the Ministry of Defense and so become regular contracted soldiers under the defense ministry. And Prigozhin refused very publicly to do this, even after the president seconded this order by saying that it is really for the good of the soldiers so that they can have social guarantees from the state, etc. So they should sign the contract. But Prigozhin said, no, we're not going to do that, using in his very descriptive language the phrase, we will not go down by the path of dishonor, which is colorful. So that was the nucleus of the conflict. Now what we want to see is what happens to Wagner. Are they being dismantled? Will some people be prosecuted for whatever, for mutiny or for other crimes connected with the things they usually do? Will they be made to sign contracts or maybe given a choice of either signing contracts or going home scot-free? So this is interesting rather than what happens to Prigozhin personally. People of his business model rarely die a natural death.
Wow, yes. I mean, history bears that out, doesn't it? At least recent history in Russia. Ekaterina, I didn't want to shift, so focus on what happens with Wagner, and that'll give us a tell in terms of maybe the success of Putin to absorb that military group into the traditional Russian army, and whether or not that indeed kind of shores up some of his political support. But on the political support or lack of it for Putin, I just want to reference one of our Bloomberg opinion columnists, Leonid Berzhinsky, and this is one of the quotes that stands out from his piece. Putin has not, for the first time, but at a critical moment, shown weakness. Even though Prigozhin didn't win, his anarchical mutiny move exposed the regime's brittleness to all who might want to exploit it. The emperor is naked. How exposed is Vladimir Putin at this point, Ekaterina?
Of course, it's hard to interpret the events of this weekend in any other way as a sign of weakness or, in the language of political science, autocratic fragility, which is one of our basic concepts, but hard to explain sometimes to people, because what autocracies do is they project the image of strength, maybe ruthlessness, effectiveness, stability, whatever, but they're really quite fragile. They cannot do power transfers. They cannot do power transits the way democracies can do it. They are very much dependent on personalities, and when something happens to these personalities, systems tend to fall apart. So it's exotic to look at, but really it's quite typical. It's something out of textbook. But for the moment, the president is in his place. This is the most we can say. Yeah. What I would be expecting to see is the emergence of some group who will claim to have saved the motherland, or at least the president, from this armed mutiny. Who will be the saviors of the nation? I think we will see it if we see some personal changes. So far, the Minister of Defense has tried to step to the public front and project this business-as-usual image that you have mentioned earlier. But will there be changes in the Defense Ministry? Will there be changes in the FSB, for example? Many insiders have named the Tula region governor, Alexei Dumin, as a kind of person who somehow managed to stop the march on Moscow, because it is true that the Wagner's column, stopped about 200 kilometers from Moscow, which is Tula region.
Ekaterina, yes. We're running out of time, but we appreciate your insights and what to watch in the days and weeks ahead when it comes to the politics of Russia and the fate of Putin. That is Russian political scientist Ekaterina Schulmann, an associate fellow at Chatham House. Thank you.